Good morning, everyone. I am Bill Bowling, and I'm going to facilitate the housing forum today. We're glad that you're able to join us. With over 600 people signed up, clearly this is working for more of you. Maybe you're showing up in your pajamas or t-shirts and sweatpants, but anyway, you're here. We're glad that you're here. Today, we're going to really address what is a major issue in the community, evictions. As we learned from Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, which we featured at a previous housing forum, evictions were a concern well before the pandemic. But with the onset of COVID-19, spike in rental rates had become an increasingly insurmountable obstacle for low-income families. In the last decade, rents in our region have increased by 65% compared to the national average of 36%. Nearly one half of all households in the city of Atlanta and nearly 1/3 of households in the region are housing cost burden. But now the scope of the problem has grown dramatically under this pandemic. More than 40% of U.S. renters are at risk of eviction. That's over 17 million households. Locally, 10,000 eviction cases have been on hold during the pandemic. And now the courts are slowly resuming operations. That number will be growing. We'll hear more about that in a few minutes. Experts estimate that over 500,000 Georgians are at risk of evictions, and that's 45% of all renters. And that jumps up to 57% of renters who make less than $35,000 a year, and 63% of those earning less than $25,000. Evictions have been a painful and long-lasting impact on families. They lose their possessions, they lose their jobs. If you're on record of having been evicted, it's hard to rent again. There's higher rates of depression and even suicide. And for our children, evictions can result in decreased outcomes in education, health, and future earnings. But there's also the issue of rental owners and operators, especially those offering affordable rentals. They're also in jeopardy. And we're going to give some announcements later today that even puts them in greater jeopardy. Missed rent payments impact the owner's ability to make mortgage payments on the property. And while devastating for families, this crisis may also have a lasting negative consequences for smaller apartment owners, ultimately impacting availability of affordable units. We have a big program today, and I want you to forgive us if we have any technical glitches. We're still learning how to do this, but we've got some great new tools for tracking eviction hotspots we're going to hear about, how Fulton County Magistrate Court is addressing the issues, what's happening in Washington, and big announcements we're going to hear about today. How can philanthropy in the private and public sector partner to make a difference? And we'll hear from some of the best practices in getting relief funds to those in need. But first, we're going to start with an exciting announcement that we're going to make today. And I'm going to call on Jack Harden, who co-chairs Metro Atlanta Regional Council for Homelessness, has been a longtime advocate for the homeless, and Doug Hooker, the executive director of the Atlanta Regional Commission and a great supporter of our work regionally, to make that announcement. So Jack, I think you're first up.
Thank you, Bill, not only for organizing and creating this conference over the years, but also for your leadership in this initiative I'm about to announce. And we're calling this initiative SOAR, Save Our Atlanta Residents. It's a regional initiative that's based on the belief that the entire community, everyone, is better off if people are able to stay in their homes through this crisis. And the goal is to keep people in their homes through the economic consequences of this pandemic, pursuing a shared pain strategy. So everyone, landlords, tenants, government, and philanthropy will have some skin in the game. Now, exactly what this looks like is still in development. The landscape keeps changing. As recently as the announcement posted at 4:15 yesterday afternoon by the CDC that it's going to issue an order to be effective Friday, I think, prohibiting certain evictions for certain tenants. Now, exactly the full impact of that is something still to be studied. We hope it'll buy us time, and we're afraid that it doesn't solve the problem. But working together, we think we can mitigate this crisis. We won't be able to solve everybody's financial problems created by the economy, but we should be able to keep people in their housing. Now, there are already many other people that work on this. The United Way, the City of Atlanta, Star C, the Housing Authority, and others. And we do not plan to attempt to supplant any of the present efforts. In fact, what we hope to do is empower, coordinate, and supplement the current efforts in a regional, time-limited, all-hands-on-deck strategy. We envision 18 to 24 months until we get to the other side of the pandemic-induced economic crisis. And we hope to keep as many people as possible in their homes through that. Now, championing this effort are four very important regional entities: the Atlanta Regional Commission, the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, the United Way for Greater Atlanta, and the Metropolitan Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. There are over 30 leaders, and the numbers are growing, in the planning group, which includes landlords, service providers, eviction specialists, the court system, government, philanthropy, and the community at large. The misery and pain so many of our neighbors are facing is literally incomprehensible. If we do nothing, I fear we will be facing grapes of wrath type encampments. This simply cannot happen. I think this is the most important thing that we'll be doing as a community in our lifetimes. And now let me turn it over to Doug Hooker of the Atlanta Regional Commission, who's one of the important co-leaders of this project. Doug?
Thanks, Jack. And thanks to all of you attending this morning to hear more about this very important subject. So how can you help with this initiative? As Jack mentioned, we are working in earnest to form our structure, but we know it's going to need expertise like yours at all levels of the effort. As board members, as volunteers, as thought leaders, and as partner organizations to help us execute this very bold initiative. And of course, we're going to be mounting a fundraising effort because it's fundraising that'll help fuel the strategy to help us keep people in their homes. We invite corporate and civic leaders to step up at every level and to support an equity fund for rental assistance and eviction prevention, knowing that your dollars will be leveraged, as Jack said, with strategies and buy-in from the public sector, the private sector, landlords, and tenants themselves. We're all in this together. We have an opportunity to take one of the country's most inequitable cities, Atlanta, and reshape it into one that cares about its neighbors, one that rises to the occasion and faces inequality head on. It's in all of our interests to tackle this issue now to mitigate a crisis. Last year, a prominent community leader and friend of mine said in a speech, "We may not be a city too busy to hate, but we are a city too busy to care." Now's the time for us, now is the opportunity for us to begin changing that narrative, to show that we care. We have the opportunity to save lives and livelihoods by keeping people housed. And you, those of you in this audience, know more than anyone else in this region how important housing stability is to life stability. And in doing so, to help Atlanta not only weather this storm, but come out stronger on the other side of it. Of course, you'll have questions. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Jack, to Bill Bowling, to myself. Cox Curry and Associates is also supporting us with this work. And Alex DeLeo with Cox Curry will be happy to take your comments and questions as well and make sure they get answered. We'll make sure that you get her contact information as well as information about how you can make a contribution in the meeting follow-up. So we look forward to sharing more with you in the days to come. Thank you and stay tuned. Bill, back to you.
Thank you, Doug and Jack. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity to help stem the tide of potential evictions and create some much needed affordable housing. You know, what is significant about this, I think, and you guys mentioned, is that we have both the public and the private sector working together, that we have the business community through the chamber, through the apartment association, as well as community-based organizations that are coming together in new ways. So I think you'll hear more about this as we continue. And now on with the forum. Throughout the future forums, we are changing how we're interacting with you. Clearly, we're online instead of meeting at St. Luke's. We can't be in person to hear your questions, so we're going to try to use the comment section of the social channels you are viewing. Periodically, we will call for questions. Simply enter your question on the Facebook, Twitter, YouTube feed you are viewing now. We will try to get to as many of your questions as possible, but remember, this is a virtual event of only 90 minutes, so Q&A will be limited. And we're also going to ask for you to weigh in with the poll question from time to time. So let's start with our first question. From your smartphone, tablet, or computer, go to www.menti.com. You'll see it on the screen, and enter the numeric code, and you'll see on the screen and answer the first question. So if you'll do that now. All right. Well, I think what we're seeing, which is so affirming to, I think, our philosophy of working together, is that we have representatives from the private, from the public sector, many of you from the nonprofit community. We have just concerned citizens who care about this issue. And of course, most importantly, we have some advocacy organizations that's going to help us. So thanks for participating in this first question. So now let's move on to the first segment. First up, join me in welcoming Sarah Stein. Sarah is an advisor on affordable housing and neighborhood stabilization on the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta's Community and Economic Development team. You can read more about Sarah in the program. Sarah, welcome. I understand the Atlanta Fed has been working with ARC and Georgia Tech on a special tool to track eviction filings. I think this will be a tremendous tool for us. So, Sarah, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bill. As Bill mentioned, my name is Sarah Stein. I'm a research advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And as such, I must let you know that the views expressed in this presentation are mine and do not represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta or the Federal Reserve System. Now, I actually have a presentation that we're going to work off of. All right, great. So if we could, as Bill mentioned, today I'll be talking about tracking eviction case data. And just to explain briefly, what we'll be doing is talking about tracking eviction case data from cases that are filed in the magistrate courts. Right now, we're able and have the capacity to track eviction cases in the 5 closest in counties to Atlanta. And I'll show you more about that in a minute, but let me first lift up all of the incredible team members that have brought this to fruition at the ARC, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and at Georgia Tech. This has really been a feat over the last 2 months. We've been working feverishly to build the technology to be able to use publicly available information about case data to bring it to the public in an accessible way so that people will have the ability to watch eviction cases as they go through the courts and to understand more about that process in real time. There certainly are tools out there that allow people to look at historic eviction numbers, and this will be a real-time tracking tool that we are very excited to present. And we actually have today the ability to show you the tool that I want to lift up Eric Woodworth at the ARC, who worked feverishly to make sure that this would be available today for you to be able to interact with at your leisure. So I'll be showing some figures from that, but you're welcome to visit it on your own as well, and we encourage you to do so. So I guess the news of today, well, there's a lot of news today. Last week's news was that the week of August 23rd was the highest number of filings in DeKalb and Fulton counties since March. So here you can see two charts that actually come from the tracker website that I will explain to you more in the future. And what they demonstrate is that in DeKalb and Fulton counties in particular, you can see the first 3 months are kind of medium to tall peaks. And then sometime during March, we see those numbers drop off. But last week in DeKalb and Fulton counties, for the 4th week of August, filings met and exceeded pre-pandemic filing numbers. So for the 4th week of the month. So filing numbers, as you can see from this chart, actually, if we could go back one, as you can see, they fluctuate throughout the month. And for the 4th week, filing numbers had exceeded it. So that's the first piece of news that I wanted to share with you. And then, of course, there's the other piece of news that has been alluded to, and you'll hear more about later today, which is the CDC's news of the eviction moratorium that will be in place through the end of the calendar year. So if we can proceed to the next slide. Thank you. So some things that we hope to bring to everyone and to various stakeholders through our eviction tracking work is one thing would be to help groups like legal services. So this slide just represents some of the data that we are able to draw and share. And here we're talking about case filing numbers and answer rates, right? So we can see for the 5 counties what the filing numbers are. And then for 4 of the 5 counties, we're still working on Clayton County. We're able to see where tenants have filed answers in those cases. That's important, many of you already know, because when a case is filed against a tenant for an eviction and that case is served upon them, they have 7 days to file an answer in order to access a hearing before a judge. Otherwise, on the 8th day, the landlord has the ability to request to move forward and get what would be referred to as a default judgment, which could lead to the tenant's almost immediate removal from the property. So filing an answer is important, and here we can see that in each of the 4 counties that we can currently track this for, there are varied rates of answer filings. And that's something that we hope to be able to share with legal services, organizations, or whomever is interested in that information. We can go to the next slide now. Another function that we hope to provide especially to emergency service providers, as Jack was talking about earlier, is perhaps a list. So this is a list of high filing addresses. So this is a list of addresses where landlords have filed multiple evictions. This is for the month of August of 2020. So with a list like this, an emergency service provider could approach these landlords, perhaps try to address some of these issues and keep people in their homes. We can go to the next slide. So quick information about how to access the filing data. We want our data to support the work of practitioners, service providers, advocates, and policymakers as you guys stabilize housing during COVID-19 and beyond. The website that you can visit the tracker at is metroatlhousing.org/eviction tracker. And you can also put in requests for access to downloadable data if that's something you're interested in. And that'll be available at various levels of aggregation or at the granular level, so the case level, depending on what the use is that you'd like to use it for. And those uses will be reviewed by our team, and a data use agreement will be put into place. And also we want feedback from you guys. Tell us how this work can support your work, and we'll try to make it happen as best we can. So let's quickly just peek into the tracker dashboard. I'm going to make sure that we're able to see that. Great. And if you zoom out a little bit, perfect. So this is the tracker dashboard. It's pretty simple to use. You can see here the 5-county area is represented, and up at the top, you can actually choose different counties that you want to look at. And you can look at it as a map, which is, so here we're looking at Clayton County. You can look at Clayton County as a map, and actually on the right where the key is, it says eviction filing rate. There's some months, January, these are the filings for January 2020. You can drop down and scroll and find any month in the year of 2020. So if you scroll down, you can sort of watch as the evictions dropped off. And what this does is it allows you to see hotspots. So this is a map of the filing rate, which means the number of filings over the number of rental units in that census tract. Now, we can also go to the chart view, and we can see what filing numbers look like for each of the counties by week and also by month. And so here you can see the blue line that you can see on the chart is actually, those are the corresponding filing numbers for 2019. So that's the basis for comparison. And you can see that right around the middle of March, filings had dropped off, and then towards the end of August had very much picked back up. So, so that's something that we had seen last week, and we were very concerned about, and are glad that we've built this tracker in order to watch. Now, we also know that the CDC has recently released its order that placing a moratorium on evictions with certain caveats around it for certain eligible persons that I think you'll hear more about later today. So, so that will hopefully have an impact on the numbers that we're seeing, and perhaps we won't see what we saw last week going forward for the rest of the year. And I think so that's the eviction tracker. I encourage everybody to take a look at it. And then I just have one last slide to share with you guys that I think this information will be sent out afterwards. It just provides some research on COVID-19 housing policies and some organizations that are monitoring and responding to COVID-19 housing issues. In case you haven't already accessed these resources, they provide lots of information about various policy options, analyses that can help you navigate what is going on. So I encourage you to access these resources as well as the tracker, and to keep in mind that even before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, 45% of rental households in the Atlanta metro area, which is over 245,000 households, were cost burdened. And that means that they were spending over 30% of their income on their house payment every month. And over half of those households were severely cost burdened at 50%. So this was an issue going into COVID-19. And as the Urban Institute has estimated, for jobs under $40,000 in the Atlanta metro area, there's an estimate that due to COVID-19, 81,214 jobs have been lost due to COVID-19. So we are in a situation that where people are feeling great financial strain, and that could have tremendous housing impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And one of the questions that was asked, I don't know if you can see it on this screen.
Oh, here we go. Yes.
Receive a case in addition to the names and addresses of the properties with high filing numbers. Do you have the name and number of the owner, corporate and property manager, so that we can negotiate?
So we're working on building out our database so that we can understand more about ownership, right? So whoever files the case is not always the owner of the property, but and sometimes is the manager. Usually, if they're filing the case, they have some kind of ability to file an eviction, and that information we do want to make it available. It won't be available if you just go to the website and click on it, but there will be a process for making requests for that information, which we do want to work with stakeholders, service providers to assist in that process. So we will be working on that. We encourage you to reach out, and once we have a data use agreement in place, then that would be one of the uses that we do very much hope that this can serve.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And, we really are a work in progress, so we appreciate the questions and feedback.
Absolutely.
We had a saying in food banking, things that get counted get done. So it's essential that we have something like this to track and know where we are and where we're making progress. So thank you so much, Sarah. Next up, we're happy to welcome a previous attendee to the forum, but I think the first time we've actually asked you to be on the panel, Judge Cassandra Kirk, the Chief Magistrate Judge for Fulton County. Welcome, Judge Kirk. I know you're overloaded right now, so we appreciate you taking time to be with us.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about the magistrate court's kind of role in the eviction process and what actions are currently underway to address the issue of evictions?
Absolutely. First, thank you all for having me, and thank you for allowing me to join this forum. It is a pleasure to be with you all. I do have a slideshow, very much like Sarah, and so once we get started, I think that is going to be the most compact way for us to move through this. I am obviously serving as the Chief Magistrate Judge for Fulton County. I was appointed by Governor Deal, and I have now been elected by the good people of Fulton County, and I thank people every time I am in a public forum. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to be the person that serves in this role. Next slide. And so when you think about the magistrate court, people are not really sure what it is we do and how we do it. I can tell you that last year, our case count was 82,000. That's pretty much normal for the average Fulton County Magistrate Court. And of those, about 45,000 of those were landlord-tenant cases, so very specific to what it is we are doing now. Our year-to-date July numbers have been only 13,000. And so the question is that because people are not filing, or is it more importantly because we have been down? And if we move to the next slide, you will see that between March 14th and July 14th of this year, we were all affected, all the courts were affected by the statewide judicial emergency. And so if you think magistrate court, the only thing we are doing is landlord-tenant cases, that would not be true. During the judicial emergency, however, we were able to stand up several calendars. We were able to stand up our electronic warrant interface, which is what we do between search and arrest warrants for law enforcement. And then we held first appearances 6 days a week. The other thing we were able to stand up, which our court was very proud to be able to do, is our misdemeanor mental health court, which is something that allows us to continue to support those participants in our mental health court that were charged with misdemeanors. And so for us, it was a pleasure to be able to do that. Now, when we're moving to what else is it that magistrate court does? Obviously, we do the landlord-tenant cases, but we also do abandoned motor vehicles. We do warrant applications. We do copy of charges. We do personal property foreclosures. Again, we do misdemeanor mental health court from the jail. We do small claims, and those would be cases less than 15,000, where damages are less than 15,000. We do abandoned minor child calendar. We do an environmental calendar. We do a garnishment calendar. We do post-judgment hearings, and one of our fun things is we get to do weddings. One of the things I want people to realize is that the Fulton County Magistrate Court is a high-volume court. Our highest volume cases are our landlord-tenant cases, our small claims cases, and our garnishment cases. We can move to the next slide. And so when we are talking about how it is we handle landlord-tenant cases, I want people to know, and Sarah alluded to it, that these are our fastest moving cases that we handle. It's our landlord-tenant cases and then our garnishment cases. And so what does that mean? The slide I have here shows how it is people can help. There are people from various walks of life in various industries that are on this call. And I want you to be aware that there are opportunities for you at each of these stages. as Sarah mentioned, when the affidavit is first filed from the landlord, the tenant is finally served. When the tenant is served, they have 7 days to respond once they are served. It is not a if, maybe, probably. It is 7 days to respond. That is where the first level of intervention, which is our legal navigation, is most helpful. What legal navigation does, or what it looks like in Fulton County, is that the Housing Court Assistance Center, as well as legal aid, but on site in Fulton County, the Housing Court Assistance Center, headed by Viraj Parma, and through the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, actually provides to tenants opportunities to figure out how to fill out that form, what it is they need to say, because not filling out that form automatically gets you opportunity for eviction on day 8, but filling out that form correctly gets you an opportunity to actually have a hearing. So the first track is legal navigation, which happens in that first 7 days. If the person, so I have an item labeled A there. That is if the tenant does not file an answer. If a tenant does not file an answer, that is the fast track to getting a writ, which means that the the property would be returned back to the owner. If you go to B, which is where the tenant has actually filed the answer, if the tenant has filed an answer which is legally sufficient, meaning that there is a case that can be tried. So in Georgia, you need to know that non-payment of rent because you don't have money, because someone was ill, because someone died, those are not legal reasons for non-payment of rent. Those will place you on a judgment on the pleading calendar. So those would be in our middle category. The category B, where people will actually have an opportunity to come before the court and plead their case, have an opportunity to be heard, is those people that have actual justifiable legal excuses or legal reasons for the legal reasons that answer the landlord's complaint. Those people will be placed in mediation. In Fulton County, we do a landlord-tenant mediation. It has been a long-standing program. And what this does is it gives it a last opportunity for the landlords and the tenants to be able to sit down and say, is this something that we can work out? This year, as a result of COVID, we have joined with 3 partners to provide resources during the mediation stage. This is important. So for those people that are watching and saying, how can I help? At the mediation stage is where resources are first being diverted and pulled. Our Star C eviction partner is Star C Apartment Eviction Relief, which is run by Margie Stagmeyer and Duncan Gibbs. What they will do is they have actually identified about 7,000 housing units that are eligible for relief. So they will work with landlords in those housing units, and they will help those landlords work with the tenants. There is a 40-40 split. So Star C pays 40%, the tenant pays 40%, and the landlord will either pay 10% or will forgive that 10%. So that's some of the resources that are coming in on the front end of mediation. Also offering those services at mediation are Hosea Helps, which has some funding from United Way, and also some funding from Fulton County. Another organization that is coming in at that front end at the mediation piece is also going to be the Atlanta Urban Leagues, the Urban Leagues of Greater Atlanta, and that is Nancy Flake Johnson's group. So at that mediation piece now, as a result of COVID, we have some landlord partners that are able to provide rental assistance to help the landlords. And so when I say they're providing assistance, it's not just let me give you money and keep going. What they are also providing is making sure that those tenants will be able to maintain in those homes and not just simply get a one-time payment. As we move over, once you've gone to mediation, you obviously go to court. Court used to take about 10 days from the time that your answer was filed. And so now obviously court is taking a little bit longer, and we'll get into that on the back end. Once you get a judgment, if that judgment is for the landlord and the tenant is in fact dispossessed, that is where community assistance comes in again. And so here is where Hosea Helps, as well as Urban League of Greater Atlanta, are able to provide community resources, and that would be housing options. That would also be opportunities for jobs, opportunities to get tenants back on their feet once they have been dispossessed. If we move to the next slide. And so during this period of time from March 14th to July 14th, I've said that landlords have continued to file. And so there have been, in this period of time, again, about 2,500 cases that have been filed. What has the court been able to do just to slow the process? Obviously, we continue to do forums, we continue to do NPUs, we continue to make sure that we are available so that people understand our process. I would encourage you to go to our Facebook, encourage you to go to our website, magistrateFulton.org, as well as looking at our Instagram account. So we are doing everything we can to boil down and make sure that people are aware what's going on. But from a court perspective, what we have done is we've broken down those cases into 3 case types. So those cases that were ready before the judicial emergency, there were only about 352 of those. There are cases that were filed between March 14th and March 27th, and so those are pre-CARES Act affidavit cases, and then cases filed between March 28th and July 25th, which required the CARES Act affidavit. We can go to the next slide. And so this is simply a highlight on the CARES Act, and that is obviously expired, but we have something new coming in. The CARES Act affidavit, the CARES Act required that the landlords file affidavits saying that their property did not meet the requirements for the CARES Act and that the evictions could move forward. If we move to the next slide. And so I talked about some of the resources that we have in Fulton County. They are listed here on this slide. The Housing Court Assistance Clinic, which I mentioned, which provides legal navigation. Our Star C Eviction Relief Fund, which has come on as a collaborative partner, as have Hosea Helps and the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. And so I wanted to give you all an outline today of how it is Fulton County is managing these resources. Obviously, our court is one. We are here to inform, engage, and empower our community. And that is something that we have been very proud to be able to do, particularly during COVID, and particularly as our way of handling cases changes. I can tell you that right now we are in a Zoom-only world for the cases that we are physically handling in court. We have attempted to do in-person hearings. We had the court sanitized. We attempted to have in-person hearings, and people came that were positive. Our numbers in Fulton County and in the courthouse alone are such that in-person hearings are not going to be a reality for us for a period of time. We are working on getting additional technology so that we will be able to have people in the courthouse as well as people handling hearings remotely. And so that is our next step in Fulton County. That was a mouthful.
You know, you wore me out, Judge. I thought I was working hard. Let me just remind folks that everything you see on the screen, you'll be able to find on the website, and we'll also send it back out to you if you registered. So you don't have to take notes as we're rushing through this. Judge Kirk, I did see that you actually do weddings. You might be doing more of those. That would be the fun part of the job.
Once we get back to in person, absolutely, yeah.
There you go. Well, thank you so much. I encourage everyone to send their prayers and good energy to Judge Kirk and the other judges working in this area. They got a big job. Stick around. We'll come back to you. Joining me now is Michael Lucas, the Deputy Director of the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. Michael, welcome back. You were with us back in June, and you were describing efforts to get relief funds in the hands of those facing evictions. So tell us what's working. What are the lessons learned so far, and how are you approaching the work? Thanks for being here, Michael.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. Get right to it because I know we want to make up time. You know, Bill, the triple threat of the affordable housing crisis, the eviction crisis, and the COVID crisis all disproportionately impact people of color. And we know this. And so as the largest provider of holistic legal services to tenants in Atlanta, and with a client population that's over 90% people of color, we felt strongly we needed to do more to be part of that community response. And accordingly, ABLF is poised to pass along over $3 million in emergency rental assistance to tenants and to survivors of intimate partner abuse in 2020. So, you know, through our team's experience in doing this work, we have learned some important lessons, and I want to use this time to share those as we are still kind of building and designing systems for distributing that emergency assistance. So one, there needs to be both a single point of easy access and entry. Has now been stood up and is being tested with the new United Way funding through 211. And we need the ability for residents to access services directly from a network of trusted local providers. The scope of this is so large. We need those access points as well. There needs to be a centralized tracking of spending and the remaining balances across the network of providers. And this is also being done and tested with the cities and the United Way's CARES Act funding so that smart referrals can be made. And really both of those go to what I think is maybe the most important point, is that we need to design every aspect of the system with an eye towards inverting the burden, to borrow a phrase that my friends at Archie use a lot, removing as much of the work on the residents and as many of the barriers to access as possible, whether that means flexible and realistic documentation requirements, application completion assistance, user-friendly policies in general. If we're not careful, I think we can really and easily design systems that are pretty great for more middle-income households who can access online applications, who preserve their bank records more easily, who have easy access to upload proof. But we largely miss the folks who have always lived closer to the margins and may need more flexibility and assistance to effectively complete the process. Again, with the affordable housing crisis, the eviction crisis, and COVID, all disproportionately impacting people of color, this is an issue of racial equity, and how we design these systems and these processes are an issue of racial equity as well. We have to pay attention to capacity issues. So the provider ecosystems that are going to be part of these responses, whether it's the CARES Act funding, whether it's through SOAR that Jack presented, they need a lot of capacity building. To do this right, especially when folks are in crisis, is labor intensive. So we need to focus on that and relatedly remove the barriers for providers as well, taking a closer look at data entry requirements and reporting requirements for this system to move and get this much assistance to folks in time for the flood that Judge Kirk is preparing for that's coming. We need to pay close attention to that. And, on that note, leaders need to be able to listen and to adapt as well. This is unprecedented in many ways. We will be learning how to do this better as we go. Like you said, Bill, it's a work in progress. As we roll things out, we may need to call some audibles and make changes. And I just want to take this moment too to thank the city and United Way for doing that, even as we speak, on the funding that is out there now to make adjustments, to learn from providers. That is going to be critical because you don't really know how all this all works until you start to roll it out. Thinking about Judge Kirk's presentation, we need to involve a wide range of stakeholders in the design process. And I commend Jack and Doug and the SOAR efforts that are underway. That already has been reflected in their efforts. Landlords and eviction courts come to mind in particular, and how we build this response. I think what Judge Kirk has done in Fulton County is a good example of how critical a role the courts can play. This one won't come as a surprise, but we need much more money. We need it from non-public sources, private and corporate philanthropy, so that we can design these more flexible systems that I'm talking about. A lot of the challenges in getting this out do come with federal funding. And so we need that to be braided sources of funding for these efforts. And as all of this plays out and the courts really get moving, whenever that is in full, there will be a critical role for more legal representation of tenants, even just to address and advise on the many new legal requirements created under these moratoriums and whether they've been complied with. So I want to recognize and commend Atlanta Legal Aid for the work they are doing to increase the number of attorneys that they have focused on representation of tenants, and the planning that we've been doing with Atlanta Legal Aid to prepare for what's coming and what in many ways is already here. Georgia Legal Services as well for the outer counties and the rest of Georgia is leaning in how they can pivot to adapt to better respond to the crisis in the counties beyond the metro region. All of that work is really going to be critical, and we need to keep a focus on that as well. We need to keep in mind at all times, especially as we come out of this, that getting back to normal should not be the goal. I think folks on this call and who attend these know things were not okay before COVID in this area. We were already looking hard at how to improve the emergency assistance ecosystems and funding and access and our affordable housing crisis before it. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And finally, kind of speaking of staying focused and the news even of last night, these moratoriums are great if they all stand, but let's not get too distracted by them either. They do not wipe away the rent burden. If we don't use the time that they buy us to innovate and work hard to make both tenants and landlords whole in this, because we can't afford to lose units, then the flood is just building up stronger behind the dam. Courts will have an even more unimaginable tsunami coming in 2021. You couldn't pay me enough to do Judge Kirk's job and what will be coming. and we will have really squandered this chance to head off as much of this as possible. So it's great that we're talking about this now. It's great that we have the SOAR effort coming down the line. If anything, these moratoriums really buy us time to get this right. And these are some of the lessons I think we've learned about how to do that.
Thank you, Michael. It's so helpful. And it really does take a village. It takes all of us pivoting and learning as we go. As you said, it takes money. So let me invite Sarah and Judge Kirk to join Michael, and we're going to try to get a few questions answered. I know we're behind a little bit, but George, our producer, what have you got? Dan Emergall. Dan being a professor at Georgia State and focused on housing, one of our experts. He asked, the building level data can also be used to identify problem landlords, those with high filing rates. The question, will the tracker be able to remove serial filings as an option? That would probably be to you, Sarah.
Yeah. We do have code developed to identify serial filings. Right now, they have not been removed from the tracker count numbers, but that is certainly something we can look into as a toggle function. And it's certainly something that we have our eye on. Thanks, Dan.
And let me just bore in a little bit, Sarah. When do we think we could get that function? I mean, I think this is one of those things that get counted and get done, and we're trying to track the good players and the bad.
Yeah, I mean, so we've been at this project for about 2 months, and we first had to develop the technology to even get to the 5 counties that we have. I know that somebody else had posed a question in the chat about when, I think it was Coweta County, when will we get to them? And, you know, that all has to do with how difficult it is to access the data that the open data that the court systems have. So our goal is to expand to the entire metro area. We would very much like to do that. And from Georgia Tech and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta's perspective, we would like for this to be even broader than that, of covering more of the Southeast, more places. So that's also on our plate as a priority that we're trying to do. As far as the functionality of the tracker and building that out is concerned, we've got a long list of things that we're trying to include in that. And I can promise you that Eric Woodworth and the team that is implementing that have been and are working feverishly to implement each of those items. Not everything will be available publicly because we are trying to be careful about the mass of data. We don't want to publish lists of names of tenants. We're just trying to be responsible stewards of the data. And but we will have data use agreements.
Well, let me ask, Sarah, is there anything that Ms. Thomas can do in Coweta County? Clearly, she saw you listed 5 counties. We're working in a region. Is there anything she could do, or anybody there to help with?
I mean, absolutely. I think that if she knows somebody involved in the court system, in the magistrate court, she could reach out and to them and understand, you know, how available that data is at this point, and maybe build relationships that could make that go much faster. Yeah.
And let me just ask Judge Kirk, do you guys communicate from county to county? You have an association. I think you told me you had occasional meetings.
So we actually do have a Magistrate Council of Georgia, which is for all of our 159 counties. But we also, in the metro area, we have kind of a chiefs meeting that is particularly with the metro area chief. So we are in communication. And with the new CDC guidelines, I'd imagine that we will be more in communication. Our Magistrate Council, our listserv like lit up yesterday. And so we will keep working through that. But the metro chiefs will definitely meet and get a plan together.
Okay, let's get one more question in, again from Dan, about giving our CDC moratorium. It would seem that almost all filings for non-payment of rent will be a reasonable contestation. Do you think it will change how evictions will be handled by the court? What does this mean to have a moratorium till the end of the year, but no money to pay for it?
So for the courts, it's going to be more of the same. We obviously are going to be, at the moment that we are able to handle cases, we will handle. I recognize that all of our evictions are not specifically for non-payment of rent. So there will be cases that we will be able to handle. How we get to them is going to be a question, because right now the declaration is only required to be given to the landlord. So that's not something the court is even aware of. And so that adds more blurry to what's going on. I think in the metro area, we will probably get together and figure out what that looks like if our council does in fact not ask that a rule be proposed, like we did with the CARES Act affidavit. So that was a special rule that our council asked the Supreme Court to put in place. So we'll see. We're all still working through it. We have until Friday, though.
Okay. And I see Michael nodding his head over here. We could stay a long time here, but let us pivot to the next set of panelists. Thank you, all of you, for participating today and all the hard work you do. First up, we've asked our friends at the Enterprise Community Partners to dial in from Washington, D.C., their home office, and share any news. When we asked Liz to be here, we didn't know we would have the news that we would have today, but I want to welcome Liz Osborne, Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Enterprise. Liz and I were emailing late into the evening last night to figure out how to get all this in a short amount of time. So Liz, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks so much for having me. As others have alluded to already, late yesterday afternoon, the White House announced that HHS and the CDC will temporarily halt residential evictions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The announcement will be officially published in the Federal Register on September 4th, but I can share an unpublished copy with organizers to send out after the call if that will be helpful. A few highlights. So in response to the president's executive order from August 8th, HHS and CDC have determined it is necessary to put in place further policies to prevent evictions. The emergency health order will go into effect immediately as soon as it's published. Again, September 4th is what's expected, and states that landlords and owners of residential properties shall not evict any covered persons for failure to pay rent. In order to qualify for this coverage, tenants must meet certain criteria, which are that they received or were eligible for economic impact payments. As a reminder, those were available to individuals making up to $99,000 per year and joint filers making up to $198,000 per year. Tenants must also demonstrate that they have taken best efforts to get state rental assistance and support, and that they can't cover rent payments, and that eviction would cause them to become homeless or lived doubled up. Tenants will have to document these 4 things and show it to their landlords. There is a form that all adults must fill out to invoke protections and certify under perjury that they've attempted to mitigate circumstances and are paying what they can. Tenants, of course, are still obligated to pay a percentage of rent if they can. Notably, landlords can still evict for health and safety reasons under the order. And any disputes over whether a tenant meets these criteria will be handled through eviction courts. A few other key takeaways to note: this covers all housing owners, not just those with federal mortgages. That's a question I get asked a lot. There's no payment backfill. So as Bill and others have mentioned, no emergency rental assistance is tied to this order. HUD has encouraged states to use other CARES Act funding for rent relief, including CDBG and ESG, but of course, states and localities are under a lot of financial strain at the moment and have earmarked those dollars for a number of other things already. The moratorium does not forgive rent or prohibit landlords or property owners from charging late fees. It expires on December 31st of this year. This is an emergency health order, not an agency rule, so there's no notice or comment period. It will be effective immediately. And finally, there are really massive criminal penalties for both people and organizations that violate the order, fines starting at $100,000 and going up, plus jail time. So I think a natural question here is, what does this mean for negotiations around the next COVID relief package? Where the latest news is that the House is working on a HEROES 2 package that will come in around $2 trillion. If you'll recall, that's $1 trillion less than the original HEROES bill that passed the House in May. Pelosi has asked for committee chairs to weigh in on the new text, which they have done. And once this draft is complete, it will reflect the $2 trillion position that Democrats have already posed as a compromise to negotiations with Secretary Mnuchin and White House Chief of Staff Meadows. So while the text hasn't been drafted yet, we do know a little bit about what it's supposed to include. Rumors indicate we'll see state and local relief, although reduced from that $1 trillion that we saw in HEROES, stimulus payments, expansion of unemployment insurance, possible changes to PPP, nutrition security programs, U.S. Postal Service funding, and notably housing provisions related to rental assistance, which is very good news. It sounds like the Dems plan to make the leap from that $3 trillion number to $2 trillion largely by cutting down on state and local funding. Although, as I mentioned, we do still anticipate some state and local relief to be included. So they're drafting that now. I'm hearing Dems will release something. We had thought maybe this week, but now it's looking more like after the 14th when Congress is back in session. Meanwhile, Mnuchin testified yesterday before the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis and said he was ready to engage with Pelosi again, but still balked at that $2 trillion number. It does seem like both sides are poised to come back to the table, which is good news. The new HHS CDC announcement does, however, throw a bit of a wrench into negotiations. Essentially, whether Senate Republicans pass another COVID package comes down to if the White House supports it. If they think they've done enough with executive actions, they'll be less inclined to support additional legislation before the elections. So as an indicator for which way things will go, you can look for who the White House puts in a room with Pelosi. If it's Mnuchin, a deal is more likely. If it's Meadows, that could signal the president is less inclined to back a deal. So for the bottom line, if I'm reading a crystal ball, my best guess is that a deal still comes together in the last week of September, mostly because I think the Trump administration still wants additional stimulus payments, and consists of a continuing resolution to fund the government through December 1st, plus a COVID relief package valued at around $2 trillion. This is really important because we believe if we get one, the next COVID package will include some type of emergency rental assistance, although the number and vehicles still remain unclear. The announcement from the administration yesterday does not include any rental support, which makes advocacy now even more critical. So that leads me to an action item for everyone who's joined the call today. There is a real opportunity right this moment to influence whether there is a deal, and if so, what's in it. So I'd strongly encourage you all to call your members of Congress, in particular those on the Appropriations Committee, Senate Banking, and House Financial Services Committees. So in Georgia, that means Senator Perdue, who is up for re-election and probably particularly interested right now in what constituents have to say. And on the House side, that's Representatives Bishop, Loudermilk, Scott, and Graves, and ask them to come to the table, make a deal, and fund rental assistance. So that's Congress and the administration in a nutshell. Trying to catch up here a little bit on time, but I was also asked to cover ways that states and localities are creatively using their CARES Act funding to address affordable housing challenges. And I just have a couple of highlights to share there. In Ohio, Cleveland and Cuyahoga County created a new coordinated rental assistance program with $17 million in various CARES Act funding from sources including CDBG-CV, so CDBG coronavirus, and ESG, and a few local funding sources, specifically through HOME. And they're implementing an innovative approach, creating a single front door for community members in need of assistance. So they have one place to go initially for help, and then the administering nonprofits figure out which type of assistance and funding can be provided to that client need. So kind of like a coordinated entry for all you homelessness service providers out there. In Baltimore, the city has used COVID-related CDBG funds, CDBG-CV, to create a temporary rent relief program to protect housing stability for low-income residents. Eligible uses are also in order to support nonprofit and pro bono legal aid counsel to assist residents under the threat of eviction, which are shown to be a really positive factor in outcomes for tenants who are under the threat of eviction. In Virginia, a bipartisan bill just passed through committee that would use some of their direct state CARES Act dollars to address emerging priorities from the pandemic. And if enacted, it would require landlords to serve written notice to tenants who have fallen behind on rent and offer tenants a payment plan prior to terminating their rental agreement. Tenants could then make payments in equal monthly installments over either 6 months or the time remaining on their rental agreement, whichever is shorter. Although, who knows if that will move forward now with the eviction moratorium. The Virginia Commonwealth has also created a $50 million rent and mortgage relief program supported by CARES Act funding to assist tenants in meeting their rent obligations. The bill I just mentioned would urge landlords and tenants to take advantage of that funding pool to help meet rental obligations.
Liz, this might be the place where we have to thank Enterprise as being a source of information. I mean, what you've shared today, and also to know that we're tackling it different ways in different communities, and we learn from each other. This really is a work in progress, and I don't know if it's good to be in the political season or it's bad for us. Hopefully Congress is going to come back and take an action on funding. We were going to take some questions right now, but I think we'll move on, if you don't mind, and we'll come back for the group and get some questions in. Is that okay, Liz?
Yep, sounds good. Thanks again.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You know, at the end of the day, everything's local. Liz just talked about us advocating with our senators and congresspeople for Congress to act. We also need to do the same thing at the local level to get counties to spend more of their money around CARES and particularly around eviction relief. It's not unusual for a new federal program like the CARES Act to be slow in getting the money out the door. Local jurisdictions have to create a program, staff it, engage everybody, select partners, carry out the work, put appropriate safeguards in place. It takes time. And while all that work is going on, help is urgently needed. Such is the case in what we're going to hear, a great story from Lawrenceville in Gwinnett County. So here to share a story about Lawrenceville Responds, please welcome Executive Director from the Lawrenceville Housing Authority, Layla Purjakia. I hope I didn't slaughter your name too much, Layla. Thank you for being here and thanks for all you're doing in Gwinnett.
Thank you, Bill. It is an honor to be here again. The way that we approached the Lawrenceville Response Center, we knew dealing with the federal programs in the before that the response is going to come, but it might be a little delayed. So several of the local nonprofits, we started the conversation with the city of Lawrenceville back in March to not just, as Doug Hooker said, mitigate the crisis that is emerging, but we wanted to take this opportunity and really come out even stronger as a community. So one of our missions was, like I said, not just the homeless prevention, because we knew, considering the populations that we serve, most of these families were in the industries that were affected by layoffs. We wanted to work with the homeless prevention, but we also wanted to focus on families' long-term sustainability, income recovery, and knowing that a lot of funding will be coming to the community through the federal programs. We wanted to take the opportunity to build the capacity of our local nonprofits. Just like most of the suburbs in the nations, we are a little behind in our capacity to answer to the growing needs of poverty and homelessness. And we knew that this would be an amazing window of opportunity to create the programs that are going to remain even after COVID-19. So the Lawrenceville Response Center, it is functioning under the umbrella of a local nonprofit called Impact 46. And you can see the website below, impact46.org. And it's basically like a hub for coordination and collaboration of the nonprofits. So we approached the city of Lawrenceville, and I really have to commend them for hearing our arguments and also understanding that they play a role, in the response as well. And with their help, they committed $125,000, and we raised from the faith community, United Way, and the New Story Charity $500,000 in just 1 week, which has been unprecedented. And we were able to provide services. We committed to 3 months of rental assistance. We also are providing employment opportunities, job matching, connecting families with nutrition, and also providing childcare assistance. So let me just shift a little bit now to the structure on the left. We have an intake case manager that collects all of the applications through web-based. We open our doors virtually in April 14th, basically 5 months before we are going to be deploying the federal CARES Act funding that we received. So we've been operating for 5 months. And we have divided our case managers to cover the extended stay areas, apartments, and now with the CARES Act funding, we're going to be expanding to the entire Gwinnett County. Initially, this was just for the city of Lawrenceville. The reason why we wanted to focus on the extended stays is that we knew from our previous work with the Live Norcross initiative, a good number of families, working families, live in extended stays, and they are literally just one missed payment for a single night away from being literally homeless and on the streets. So we have an organization, Village of Hope, locally. They are the only street outreach organization that I know of, and they have amazing partnerships with these property managers. And we were able to leverage that and work with the extended stay property managers to accept these rental assistance. What we did in addition is we worked with the legal aid of Gwinnett, and we created the flyers for that we shared with all of the police departments in Gwinnett County, including the Gwinnett County Police Department. And the flyers basically state that according to the Georgia landlord-tenant law, these extended stays residents who have been long-term, they are actually considered tenants, not guests. And this is really important because as tenants, they have legal protections under the state of Georgia landlord-tenant law. And the landlords must file for the eviction as opposed to just a illegal lockout. So we wanted to inform the police departments to defer that to the courts instead of just assisting the property managers at extended stays locking out families for missing one night. And that has been legally argued in the Gwinnett courts successfully by legal aid. For the apartments, we did a very similar approach. We partnered with several property managers, and the process has been really efficient because we could send one payment request for all of the renters who have fallen behind. We have a really good online filing system for each household where we verify that they were laid off, that they are a resident indeed, that they have a lease, and proof from the landlord that they were late. So we had that whole process in place before the CARES Act funding became available. We also have a really great partner from the private sector, Pad Split. They were instrumental. Several of our clients were moved there, and their rents are, there are single rooms. It's not for everybody, but especially our extended stay clients who are single individuals, they were able to pay half of what they used to pay in the extended stays. We recognize also that we, just in the first 3 or 4 months, we ended up spending or investing $200,000 in the local apartments. So we were basically a lifeline for them during the during the eviction ban when they could not file for any evictions. And I think that this is an opportunity to recognize that this funding needs to be used more strategically to target the landlords who are willing to work with us, and especially those that might be at risk of foreclosure. And I just wanted to also highlight all of the case managers that work either directly with the extended stays or with the apartments, residents residing in the apartments or throughout the county. We could not do this work without all of the partners that we've listed here. We knew that we can't just help the families and the community by providing housing assistance. We worked hard to get these families back to work. Georgia Center for Opportunity, they've been amazing. We use their employment platform, and we use the employment coaches from the Lawrenceville Employment Center to match up some of these clients who were not furloughed, but literally laid off, with employment opportunities. And again, looking long-term towards sustainability, some of these individuals regained employment at $5, $6 higher than pre-COVID layoffs. And another barrier has been just lack of childcare once these businesses did start to reopen. and being making sure that we're filling all of the gaps to make to encourage success. We partner with the Quality Childcare, and they have agreed to subsidize up to 12 weeks for our clients for the childcare needs, so they can go back to work. So, in short, we've worked really hard to work with the homeless prevention and to utilize this window of opportunity to build a nonprofit's capacity so we can better serve our clients even after the pandemic ends. And I will be here for any questions later on.
Thank you so much, Layla. We're going to learn from each other, and you really are on the front lines, learning as we go. So we'll come back to you in just a moment. Let me just say that we're running about 10 minutes late. We crammed a lot of things in here because we thought it was important. So we would ask for your forgiveness that we may go a few minutes long today. Now let's pivot to the other side of the conversation, the owners and operators of rental properties. I can imagine with the announcement yesterday by the administration that we would continue moratoriums to the end of the year, but not provide any money yet. It would be shocking for owners. How are they going to pay their investors? So we've asked Stephen Davis, the Director of Government Affairs for the Atlanta Apartment Association, to join us. Stephen, thank you so much. We recognize that not all rental properties are the same and that there's class A, B, C, D. Can you tell us how your association members who serve low-income families, how are they weathering the storms, and what recommendations would you have?
Yeah, thank you all so much for allowing me to be here. It's an honor to be on this panel. It's always great to get our message out there. Yeah, so all properties are created different. So our association represents about 400,000 apartment homes across the 16 county metro Atlanta region. Including that is the very large multinational companies all the way down to the mom and pop company that has 20 units. So we represent everything, and that includes all classes of property, A, B, and C. And something that I think, Bill, you're aware of is that our association hosts, we like to say, the world's largest annual food drive every year.
I know that one well.
Which has provided over 8 million meals a year for the Atlanta area through the Atlanta Community Food Bank. And we also partner with great organizations like Open Doors Atlanta and Margie Stagmeyer's Star C Eviction Fund. So as we're looking at how our smaller members are handling this, members all across the stripes, as soon as this pandemic started back in March, whether or not they were under a order to have an eviction moratorium or not, they started working with their residents through waiving fees such as credit card fees and late fees, entering into flexible payment plans to allow you to pay essentially as you go. Some even allowed you to use your security deposit to help pay your rent. And they also allowed you to sign new leases that would allow you to stretch your lease out to 12 or 15 months to lock in that rate to keep that steady. And I guess if you're a larger property, you would think you could absorb the hit more, and that is generally true. But something I think is a misnomer is that apartment communities run on extremely high margins, which that is not the case. On average, the National Apartment Association put out a study. On average, for $1 of rent, only 9 cents of that go back to the actual owner operator to use. The rest of it is spent on taxes and fees and paying for capital improvements and stuff like that. And so as a person who went to the University of Alabama and studied political science, I was trying to wrap my head around that. I was like, man, that's not a lot of money. So my very first apartment in DC, my rent was $995. So that meant that the owner made $89 a month off of me. And then, so that's not a lot of money when it comes to, if you're not receiving any rent from anyone, to look at those financial obligations that are still there. And if you happen to have a property that is experiencing a large amount of tenants not paying their rent, then you yourself are in a financial obligation or financial burden. Right, I guess in April, I received a call from one of our members, and they asked me. They said, Stephen, hey, I'm working hard with my residents. I haven't been able to get any federal or local assistance to help me pay my bills, but I'm going to do right by my tenants, and I'm going to keep and my residents. I'm going to keep them in their apartments. But what can I do to help get them some benefits? They didn't qualify for any federal stuff. So he is that owner was the typical person that's trying to work extremely hard to keep all the residents in their apartments. They just need a little bit of help, and that's where I think everyone said this. We need money. Direct financial rental assistance is what is needed to help weather this time right now. Not a lot of people know, but apartment complexes are generally the biggest financial backers are usually you and me through our 401ks. So if you want so that's where the profits from that go, are to help you through the stock market. So if those obligations aren't met, it has cascading effects down. And also teachers' pensions own a lot of that, police officers' pensions, firefighters' pensions, state employees' pensions. Go into a lot of that. So I think what we really need to do is make sure that the financial burden is helped to be paid, because right now is what we've heard is that with this new eviction moratorium put out by HHS and the CDC, is that there will be no rental assistance that comes with that. So that continues to put the burden on the private property owners whose bills are still coming. They've still got to pay their rent. They still got to pay their employees. They still got to pay their taxes and all this stuff. So direct financial assistance is what is needed, because if they don't meet those obligations, then they themselves are at risk, and the properties could be closed. So we need to make sure we're looking at that one as it goes. But the Apartment Association is a resource for anyone that needs help. Like I said, we have 400,000 units that our members manage across the area. So we'll always be a resource. So if there's anything you need, we like to partner with cities and county governments. We'd also like to thank I think I'm getting the hook to get off, but before we jump off, I would like to thank the city of Atlanta, the mayor, the city council, and especially someone who I call way too much, probably Terry Lee, the chief housing officer, for them partnering with United Way and using their COVID CARES Act money to help people pay their rent. So we'd like to thank them for that, and also Gwinnett County for their actions. And we just encourage, so my action item is we encourage local governments, counties and cities to use their CARES Act money and any other money to help pay the people's rents.
Thanks, Stephen. A quick question. The Apartment Association has been a great partner. A quick question, as a percentage, how many apartment owners are the small ones versus the large ones that we think are well-heeled and they could get through this time? Do you have that number?
For our membership, we tend to be larger. Our membership tends to be on the larger members, but across the area, I would generally say it's probably divided into thirds. About a third are the Class A, about a third Class B, and about a third Class C on general. But our membership tends to be a little on the larger side of it for that aspect.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. We're going to come back to you.
Thank
Again,
you.
we're kind of pushed on time. We're all interested in learning more about the COVID response, the local response over the last 6 months, particularly the efforts of the philanthropic community. We're going to ask someone who's been on the front lines probably longer than any of us on this call today, Proteet Biswas from the United Way of Atlanta. You've been a great friend. You've been here before, Proteet. Welcome back. There's a lot of help that's needed. For those impacted by COVID, United Way and the Community Foundation, Greater Atlanta, were quick out the door to get some funds going. Tell us, what can you tell us about some of the examples you've seen so far? What's working, what's not working, what do we need to learn? Thanks for being here, Proteet.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for your leadership. You're a great model for all of us, so thanks for that. we are really living in a great area. Where from the word go, from the crisis, I see examples of collaboration. I see examples of people stepping up. Now, at the same time, in the next phone call, I also see the tremendous need, how people can't be reached. So it's always, there's lots happening, but there's so much more that needs to happen. So I'm really grateful that Jack's talked about SOAR, that their efforts coming together. What's important is that people are beginning to be flexible. You heard Stephen from from the apartment association, that landlords, the property owners, are playing a role in this crisis. I think that's what's important about the change. So whenever crisis happens, philanthropy steps in, sometimes government steps in, but the role of the property owners and the property managers in trying to work together, the work of Star C. So again, Margie and her group, Judge Kirk mentioned them. They started early on trying to get the 10%, trying to create a fund where all three entities, the tenant, the philanthropic group, as well as property owners, come together. Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership gets a big shout out, not only for hosting this wonderful forum, but they took it on and found that they could, for their developments, they could try to forgive about 30% early on. I want to also highlight small agencies like Single Parent Associate Alliance, Spark, that goes around and talks to different landlords and gets 10%, 25% off for individual. It's a lot of work. Each one's story is different. But I think if we come together and collaborate, the big collaboration happened between United Way and Community Foundation as an example. It happens everywhere, but that's a great example of the COVID Response and Relief Fund, right? We raised over 25 million, managed to give out 19 million in just 60 to 90 days. So great things when we come together, and you just heard lots of examples. So we learn from each other. So Leah's work in Gwinnett, especially with the extended stay, is quite remarkable. I want us to also point out that as we go forward, we need to think about flexibility. Oftentimes well-intentioned, and I'm going to put United Way right in the middle, we make up the guidelines based on different sources of funding or interpretations that actually sometimes exclude certain groups. We must be flexible to keep making changes. So Michael pointed it out that even with from the City of Atlanta work, even though the guidelines were set, we are listening to our partners and trying to make changes. There are always unintended consequences. So some jurisdictions are helping people in extended stay. Some jurisdictions haven't as yet gone there. Some jurisdictions are insisting on official leases, but you know that lots of our people, I work in the area of homelessness, lots of our folk, especially those with mental health issues, might be in programs where they might have a bedroom. They don't have a lease, but they have a program document. Well, if we can be flexible, and it takes us the understanding, some of it might be based on the criteria sent down from the feds, some of it might be state level, but there are other places where flexibility is possible. And I think that is going to be what I see as the bright spot. Our community is collaborating. I hope all of you, for example, right now, we need to spread the word about this amazing fund, 22 million from the City of Atlanta through United Way, but we need all the low-income residents in our community, those at 60% of AMI, to apply, right? It's not enough. There will be more need, and I'm glad we are talking about it. It's just an amazing forum, great speakers, great information, and I feel privileged just to be on this panel. Bill? I think you're mute. Bill, you're mute. Bill, I think you were mute.
I'm sorry, Pratik. I'm the last one that needs to be muted. I was just going to ask you, money is the issue, being flexible is the issue. If people are calling their county and asking for more support, what exactly are you asking them for? More CARES money?
So more money always helps, but it must come with flexibility. Flexibility that the local folk Leah in Gwinnett. The people who are actually doing the work can help make the decisions. We are getting amazing feedback, even on this forum, Bucket Christian Ministries, AVLF. They're all pushing for change, right? They all are asking how to help their clients. We must be flexible. So it's money, flexibility, and a sort of a joyful celebration, because it's tough and we will always have groups that are excluded, but let's try to help more people and come together to do that.
Well, all you got to do is call Layla and you find joyful. So there's some questions that up. It seems the CDC moratorium will require that renters pay back all rents by December the 31st or face eviction. Is that correct? Liz, this might be to you.
Sure. So certainly the moratorium still states that renters owe rent and that landlords can continue to charge late fees. And then the eviction moratorium ends on December 31st. So landlords can pursue eviction following that unless it's extended. Whether or not that rent is due exactly on December 31st or later isn't stipulated in the announcement. I think that would probably be between, you know, the landlord and the tenants themselves, based on how far back in rent the tenants are.
Okay. Dan is asking another question. I recall some language in the new CDC moratorium that seems to exclude hotels and motels. And we know we have thousands of people living in those situations. So would this exclude the extended stay hotels? Lego, you may know about that, or Proteep, Liz?
I don't know about it, but the bottom line is that what we're trying to make those owners of the properties understand is that they still have to follow the legal process and file for an eviction and go through the order. So even if there's no eviction ban, just having to go through the process, it allows these families some time to get caught up, as opposed to just being locked out overnight.
I would just add, that's true. Hotels and motels are excluded from the eviction ban, and so that would certainly mean that the people who are residing in them are not covered.
Okay. Let's go one more question. We are running a little late, but these are important, from Courtney George. A lot of the burden seems to be placed on the tenants and the property owners. Will there be any steps taken on the federal level to include the investors and banks that lessen the financial burden? Liz, this may come back to you.
Sure thing. So after the eviction moratorium that was included in the CARES Act, federal agencies and regulators did step in and take some regulatory actions to try and work on foreclosure and eviction on behalf of investors and banks. And so I'm certainly hopeful that that will happen this time around, but of course remains to be seen. I think also will be interesting to see what happens with COVID relief package, and then how the federal government and agencies follow suit.
Okay, yet to be determined. George, do we have another question? Dan, you're back. Has the Atlanta Apartment Association laid out a model besides the Star C that expects member owners to use to partially forgive rent arrears? Stephen?
Yeah, I would just, the answer to the previous question, I would say whoever has the better lobbyist will probably end up being the one that pays. But so we don't, to answer Dan's question, we don't have a model per se, but we are encouraging our members, as always, to work with their individual residents, as many of them are already doing, to help with financial means. Some of our members back in the time did actually offer grant programs to help individual people pay their rents, and forgave some of it, but that's on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Wish we had more time. I mean, I think there's so many questions to answer here, but I want to thank each of you for being on today, and limited time. So I know that's hard. Everybody's got more to say. I want to pivot once again. You know, the Housing Forum has been meeting for years. As you know, we have worked with House ATL and created a plan. We've been working with the city And one of the leaders at the city and advocates is Councilman Matt Westmoreland. And Matt, we wanted to invite you back today. I know you have an announcement to make and something that we're going to be very interested in.
Sure. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. And first, I want to say a word of appreciation to the 24 organizations who are helping the city distribute our $22 million in CARES Act funding for rental assistance, especially those of you who have helped provide some critical feedback to revise processes and guidelines in real time. So thank you to everyone who is on the call. 2 weeks ago today, 7 of us on council introduced legislation to restart the conversation about a housing opportunity bond. 2 years ago this month, House ATL came out with its initial recommendations that included issuing a housing bond last spring. The mayor and council were close to passing one. There's also language in the mayor's affordable housing plan around expanding this program. COVID hit and we pressed pause on that, both to get a better sense of what the municipal bond market was looking like and to make sure we could pay the debt service on such a bond. We introduced new legislation. We're calling it Building the Beloved Community. It's $100 million at a time with the wide income gaps that have been addressed already in this conversation that COVID is only going to expand. This arguably is more important now than it was 5-6 months ago or 2 years ago. It's $100 million that would be used to fund multifamily development, small and large, permanent supportive housing efforts, a significant portion to owner-occupied rehabilitation programs, land acquisition, so we can control the affordability forever, the traditional set-aside for nonprofits. We're being mindful of revenue at the city being tight, especially over the next 2 or 3 years, and thinking through how we can come up with creative ways to pay the debt service, especially in these first 3 to 5 years. Without impacting other important city services. So excited to restart this conversation, need your help and support to express to everyone who is elected at City Hall how important this topic is and that we need to move forward on a bond in the coming weeks and months. And thank you very much for the chance to spend a couple minutes with you this morning.
Thanks, Matt. Be a little more specific when you say we need your help.
Sure.
Right?
So
this is in process. You're in the finance committee. You have to work.
Yep.
We've got to figure out how to pay for it. But when people want to help, what should they do?
Reach out to the members of City Council and to the mayor and underscore that, the debt service on a $100 million bond is about $6 million a year. It's less than 1% of the city's general fund budget. And it will allow us to inject $100 million into this city at a very needed time. And so it's currently sitting in 2 committees. It's in the Community Development Committee that I chair, and then it's sitting in the Finance Committee. In between those 2, it's almost every member of council. It's got 7 co-sponsors. So obviously the support is significant already. And just underscore to folks as you're talking to them how important it is that we work on moving this forward.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you for your perseverance. I mean, it takes somebody getting up every day saying, we've got to come back to this issue and we've got to work on it. So getting 7 co-sponsors, getting it back on the books. I hope all of us on this call will make those calls to council. So thank you for that leadership, Matt.
Thanks, sir.
We've heard much today from our presenters. Local government should be encouraged to prioritize CARES Act funding for eviction prevention. Local government should consider investing further into eviction prevention. No one sector is going to solve all the problems. We've heard examples of great public-private partnerships. We need philanthropy, and the announcement early on in our program by Jack Harden and Doug Hooker about the SOAR program is an effort to really engage philanthropy in a major way. We're excited to see the new eviction tracker. We need to know if we're making progress and where kind of the hot spots are. And we need all of you. It really is, at the end of the day, it's up to us to do this work. We've been meeting and talking for a long time. We find ourselves in an unusual situation. But what it calls for is greater flexibility, greater compassion for each other, greater support, for the owners, for the judge, for the council members, and for all of us working out in the community. I think it really requires that we frame this around a moral issue. This is the right thing to do. It's important for the business community because we don't want to be perceived in Atlanta as a place that didn't step up. It's not a good place to do business. But finally, it's really up to us to help our neighbors in need. I want to thank the folks who helped put this on. First and foremost, George Bergen from ANDP, who is our producer. I want to thank the planning committee and particularly James Alexander and Marissa Ghani at ARC, Bruce Gunner. We had multiple calls between each meetings. And thank each of you for being here. This is something we can do together, that we can make progress, and that we can make a better community. So thank you all for being here today.